Welcome to Sex Care is Self-Care, a conversation on women's sexual health, brought to you by the She Plus Foundation, formerly the Patty Brisbane Foundation for Women's Sexual Health. I'm your host, Patty Brisbane. Today is a very special episode of Sex Care is Self-Care. Joining me is Lauren Hueber of Claremont Mental Health, and perhaps just as important, she's my daughter. Say hello, Lauren, to everyone out there, and will you just kind of tell them what you do on a daily basis?
Yes. Hello. I am Lauren Brisbane Hueber, Patty's daughter. And first and foremost, I just really want to thank you for having me out to do this podcast. I feel like it's incredibly valuable and helpful. So thank you for asking me to do this today. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I have the absolute privilege of working at a practice that specializes in working with survivors of narcissistic and abusive personalities. So we attract a wide variety of clientele, but our main specialty is working with survivors of emotional abuse. I think that a lot of my clients come in and they feel as though something just doesn't feel right within themselves. And then through working with me, I mirror and kind of guide them and offer psychoeducation. And they start to recognize that it might not necessarily be just this particular relationship or friendship or what have you, but these patterns have been occurring in their life since they were little. So, there's a lot of excavation that occurs, if you will, and I feel incredibly privileged and honored to guide people to that healing journey. And it begins first with facing the dragon, so to speak, and that dragon lives within us.
Wow. Sounds like a really great place to be, helping someone else. I know that when I came to you with this question, I was really nervous because I know your practice is really growing and you're so busy, but I really looked to your expertise. Why did you say yes to writing for the She Plus Foundation blog?
Well, it's a passion of mine just to get more information out there. I think, the access that others have is incredibly helpful and necessary, so wherever I can go to have a broader reach, that's kind of my aim. I work in an office, and yes, we take a wide variety of insurances, but the truth of the matter is that the access for really good healthcare, mental health care, it's not where I would like it to be.
I think I can say that for a lot of things. So I get it. And this is an avenue where you can find those who are looking for answers. So thank you. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there reading and saying, I'm finding myself. Would you say stress is different than trauma?
In a nutshell, 100% would say stress is different than symptoms related to trauma. Yeah. There's a lot of overlap. Some people don't know this, but mental health workers work from the DSM-5, and so what this is it outlines symptomology for particular diagnoses. The thing is, I don't like to put anyone in a box. And, I think that a diagnosis can be helpful. It can be a guide for treatment planning and care. However, I think it's valuable just to really take a deeper dig into what are you experiencing. Now, the question you asked me was about the ways that stress differs from symptoms of PTSD or trauma, a trauma-related disorder. And stress is unavoidable. Stress is, life is lifey, right? Like life just doesn't stop. Time doesn't stop. And the more obligations and responsibilities we have, whether that be work, paying bills, some of us have more privileged problems than others. However, we all have problems. And whatever your problems are, the first thing I want to say is, what you're experiencing related to stress, do not compare to others and say to yourself, well, I shouldn't, qualify this because somebody else is dealing with something far worse. Is that true? Yeah, probably it is true. But is it helpful to you? Because really, the importance is staying in your lane, so to speak, and being rooted in your own experience. Because if you're experiencing stress, and maybe even prolonged stress, that can be incredibly problematic. And then we go into our threshold of tolerance, so we all have this like window of tolerance. And I know for me personally, mine was incredibly narrow. And so I looked at just the tiniest inconvenience as overwhelming. But what my clients learn when they're working with me is that can be related to a trauma disorder. It can be related to, unresolved, untreated trauma, because if something very tiny or small or insignificant or just a normal everyday stressor is feeling overwhelming to you, that's something that I would say seek out some professional care, get some guidance. What therapy is it offers perspective.
Yeah, and I think people are looking for that. I know that, you look at the word trauma, and it's out there. If you're on online, on TikTok, whatever, people are talking about it. What do you think about people being online and looking up trauma? And I think they could go down a rabbit hole, but that's just me. Give me your perspective on that.
Oh my gosh, 100%. I mean, I would consider myself an anxious person. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I have this cough and shallow breathing. And then you go on Google and you're looking it up. And then I probably call my mom and I'm like, I think I'm dying. Like, I think that I have this, disorder. And you can go down a rabbit hole for sure. And I find myself doing that too in research, where I'm like, this isn't even what I was looking up. But we live in an information-laden society now. Everything is at our fingertips, which is why seeking out someone who has expertise and is specialized in a particular niche of care is so valuable. Because how do you sort through all that, right? Like, all of a sudden, you're like, I think that I am autistic. And I also think that I probably have been living with undiagnosed ADHD my entire life. And I'm possibly also bipolar. And so the truth of the matter is, yes, there's comorbidity, which is like overlapping diagnoses. But like I said in the beginning, let's not put ourselves in a box.
Exactly. I think that so many people do that once they go online. But how can you tell the difference of I'm just stressed or I'm actually experiencing trauma? I mean, how do you do that with your patient?
So stress is when we're facing a particular challenge and we're feeling frustrated, right? So stress is this applied abstract pressure, meeting a deadline or trying to prepare for a podcast or attempting to prepare for a job interview. Stress is, I lost a job, and now I'm faced with trying to figure that out. Stress is my kid isn't doing well in school, right?
Yeah.
And these are components of life that we cannot just get away from. They're going to be in our face, right? And so it applies pressure. But the thing is that I've learned through my own reading, research, and experiential knowledge, which is lived experience, is that stress is so vital.
That's kind of my next question. Why is stress important in our lives? Talk to me about that.
Stress is so vital because it kind of shapes and builds us. Without stress, without that pressure, we are not growing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like if you think of a rubber band, you take that rubber band and you spread it a little bit and it doesn't go very far. And then you kind of contract it and then you pull it again, right? And it goes further. And so it's about flexibility, stress, challenges, overcoming, and harnessing and kind of curating your experience through frustration is also curating resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably the age-old cliche, but we all need to harness that. We need to curate resiliency. We need to nurture resiliency and be kind to ourselves, offer ourselves forgiveness and grace, and we're human. And I've always said, my first book is going to be titled The Hazards of Being Human. So now someone's going to take it, but that's okay. But that's what it is. It's like there are all these hardships and challenges that we face, and it is messy and it is humiliating and incredibly humbling. But without it, what is life? And it creates opportunity for empathy, connection, compassion. I pull from threads of my own lived experience to feel with others, and there's a vast difference, which might be for a whole different podcast, but a vast difference from feeling with and feeling for. And I think that before becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist, I felt for often, and that created just a lot of deregulation for me, and it also compelled me to pull away from people a lot.
I could see where that would happen, and I think that's why having or seeing somebody kind of helps you regulate and see your patterns and see where the work needs to be done. Am I right on that? Or
yeah, for sure. As a therapist, it's so critical
mm-hmm.
to remain objective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if I know that I'm going into a session with a family or a couple or a client that maybe hits some chords within me of familiarity, resembling some of my own struggles or challenges, I've got to put that in a box, right, and up on the shelf, because this is so much about my client, and I do not want to put myself or insert myself in their experience.
Right. I wouldn't want your job, by the way. How do you know if trauma is impacting your relationship or relationships?
Well, sounds like a simple question, but it's actually so multifaceted. The symptoms of a trauma-related disorder, are going to be like chronic nervousness. You might feel easily agitated, more irritable. You might experience what's called rumination. So you're ruminating on, fear-based cognitions, thoughts. You might be ruminating on a resentment or, this person did this thing. And so that thought, you're just kind of like petting it in your brain. You might experience flashbacks. And so with flashbacks or even sleep interruptions that are interrupted by various things, oftentimes nightmares, what happens is you're losing sleep, but then you're kind of altering your behavior to avoid that discomfort. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how would you know? You would know because you're feeling removed from your life, right? Trauma is repetition, not conscious repetition often of the trauma, and trying to enact a way out of it. Mm-hmm. Because trauma, it thwarts mobility and it robs agency. So agency is voice, it's choice, it's an ability to leave. It's not being heard when you say no, not being able to say anything at all. And so in those moments, and I guess maybe I'm speaking more about interpersonal trauma, so trauma that occurs between two people. But trauma can be vast. Trauma, and it isn't necessarily the event, so to speak, that happen or events, but it's what happens after. It's the person that didn't hear you. It's the person that you couldn't tell. It's the humiliation you experience and the blame of self and the confusion. It's the ongoing emotional deregulation that's happening within yourself, and it's keeping you from living.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that couples come to you because it's having an impact on their intimacy in the bedroom?
Yes. They might not know that. I think another reason why I felt like coming and talking or to you and for this podcast, but also for being a guest writer for the blog is because, giving some more information, giving more insight about, for women that are out there just kind of like, oh, I just have low desire. I'm not interested in sex anymore. Mm-hmm. Or why do it? Because it's just, I'm not experiencing orgasm or it's not pleasurable, and they're resigning it to, well, I'm just getting older. It's just not something that I'm into. But our sexual self is such an important part of ourself and our lived experience. And it can be such an incredibly delicious experience, and when we tell ourselves that it's just this or it's just that and whatever, I don't need it, we're robbing ourselves of so much joy.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I also like that you're letting these listeners know that you're not broken. This can be fixed. Mm-hmm. And so many times people are so prideful that they don't want to call and pick up the phone and say, I need help. Sometimes they don't even know that. How is one help that person out there that's listening find a way to pick up the phone and call for help?
Okay, yeah. Well,
it's a big one, I know. I
think the first thing I want to say is we lie to ourselves. We excuse, We rationalize, we try to logic our way out of it, or we suppress and avoid and say it's not that big of a deal, or I need to get it together. This isn't really that serious. I'm being dramatic, whatever it might be. But the reality is, yes, it's hard to seek help. I think what's even more challenging, though, is admitting that you need it, is telling yourself you deserve it.
Oh, I like that. Because I know that I talk to a lot of couples. Through my whole career, I've talked to people who are getting in and out of relationships. And some of the strongest couples that I have met are couples that start off together, not because they're in a bad relationship, but they want to keep their relationship healthy. Would you say that that's a good way to start? I mean, having sessions with a therapist, maybe weekly, monthly?
So, well, first, I've got to say that, growing up with you as a model, and knowing that you were doing this important but also super taboo and hush hush work, right? Mm-hmm. You had this vision and passion, and you were good at it, to provide women a safe space to learn more about their physical bodies and how to harness their pleasure, right? Because I think as women, we even now, we're told that we need to be the pleaser.
Okay. We shouldn't, but
exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And you have also, like, always modeled and taught me, to be open and to know myself and to know my body. And that set the stage for parenting my own children in a very sex positive way, right? So for couples, seeking out couples therapy, yeah, having somebody who really can advocate for the main client in a couple session, which is not him, her, them, they. It's not this partner or that partner. It's the relationship. Mm-hmm. That's my main client, and I make sure that my couples know that. Yes, both of them have a valuable story to tell, but what I also want them to know is neither one of you are right and neither one of you are wrong.
I love that, because it's so true. It's like, I've always said that the key to a successful relationship has always been communication, and always listening and, finding a way not to blame. And I do think that sometimes we want to point our finger and go, you did that. I think going and seeing somebody helps you move into a positive direction, because isn't it true that if you're not moving in a positive direction, this can play havoc on your sexual health.
It can play havoc on your sexual health. It can show up in a wide variety of ways, actually. The simplistic or more common way this shows up is a lack of desire. And basically what that is we're keeping score in our house. I have this resentment and they have this resentment, and we're just at odds, or we're not connecting. We are business partners, we're roommates, and we are like ships passing in the night. And so when that happens and a couple aren't nurturing that connection with each other or learning ways to communicate, because as you say, you've always preached that communication is so critical. I had somebody ask me in session once, what do you think is the key to a healthy romantic relationship? And I said, honestly, self-reflection. the ability to be honest and take accountability. And also, that includes, hearing your partner. You don't have to agree. You don't have to see it the same way. But what I find is that these couples are saying something to each other and they're having two individual conversations. Neither one are listening to the other.
And so when they sit down with a therapist, then your job is to help each one of them understand what the other is saying?
It isn't even about what is being said, because the main issue isn't the dishes or, the fact that, they seemed irritable on this date we went on, or they don't seem like they want to be a part of the family. It's really not that. It's, okay, so what does that mean to you? It's slowing everything down and getting into the heart center of the primary emotion they're having. What's that emotional experience? And oftentimes it's, I don't feel wanted. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like they've got my back. I'm scared. I'm afraid that they're not in this with me. I feel alone. And when we can put it in those emotional terms instead of logicking and using these like rational statements of you did this or you didn't do that, that's when they can start hearing one another. Because a couple who truly do care for each other and love each other, when they hear it reframed in that deeper, more vulnerable space, they often say, I had no idea you felt that way. And they're hearing and they're connecting and they're having these restructured emotional experiences with one another. And they're seeing each other in a different way.
Like that. Sometimes I think that's so important to be reintroduced to your partner, because we all change. And I love the fact that you're able to help couples get through that hump and bump and holes in the road. Lauren, I know our time is up, but I always want to give the listeners an opportunity to ask the question, is there anything else that you would like to add that you feel like, well, we need to cover this?
There's so much more.
But this isn't our last one.
Okay.
I promise.
There's trauma, and the trauma experience and symptoms related to it are so vast. So I do look forward to taking a deeper dig into the different ways that this impacts our sexual health and our sexual self. However, the one thing I do want to say, and maybe this is a little teaser for our next one, because I do plan on addressing in my next blog for you guys sexual trauma. And that's a beast.
Yes.
So individuals who have experienced interpersonal trauma, or especially sexual assault, or sexual trauma in general, that can stick and stay if we are not addressing it. And we may have buried it so deep in the cellar of our soul and determined that we've dealt with it. We're not going to look at it because of the shame that we experience, the self-blame, and the uncertainty of making sense of why, or how, or just belief in the goodness of people. And then people will walk through, life so guarded and not aware. So what trauma does is it just stays in this somatic space instead of our brain space and our cognition. And so when something resembles the traumatic experience or the sexual assault or violation, they will brace. Their body will tense up. They may freeze, right? They may feel symptoms of disgust, repulsion. They may feel deep insecurity. I can't let my partner do this to me because I cannot be that open. I can't let somebody have that access to my body. And so, it isn't necessarily, okay, let's sit down and talk about that and put that into narrative, because sometimes that can cause more harm.
Mm-hmm.
It's about helping the client get back into their body and to be inside of themselves and to have these experiential healing moments of self-soothing where they learn how to soothe. So many of us didn't learn that growing up. And so we're just walking through life on a hot wire of anxiety.
Yeah, I get it.
And we've got all of this armor on.
Yeah.
And the most beautiful takeaway, something that I've learned and I've picked up from other experts, is we can only go as deep with another person as we've gone with ourselves. And until we know our own darkness, we cannot sit with another person in theirs.
I love that. I love the fact that you really did, when we started talking about trauma and stress, you held my feet to the fire, which wasn't long, to say, Mom, there's so many aspects of this, and it's just not one podcast, or one paper. It is a blog. We need to cover more. And so I'm really excited that you'll be back again here soon, and we'll be doing, I think we've got 2 or 3.
I hope
with
so.
you in the
there's
hopper.
So much more.
I know. And I think this is good for our listeners, because it's like a book. You want to find yourself in the book. And so when you're listening to the podcast, I hope people can find themselves or give themselves permission or find this being a safe platform for them to come and to move forward in their life. So we're going to close. If you like what you heard today, please rate and subscribe to our podcast. For more information on the She Plus Foundation at www.sheplusfoundation.com. Remember, sex care is self-care, and sexual health matters.